Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Minnesota Chapter of ARCS Annual Awards Ceremony. These are usually in-person events, but now with the recent pandemic and social distancing, we're trying out a different format. We're pleased to welcome so many of you from Minnesota. In addition, we welcome a national audience of ARCS members, ARCS scholars, and friends from all over the country. I'm Barb Gorgon, president of the Minnesota Chapter of ARCS Foundation. For those of you unfamiliar with ARCS, ARCS stands for Achievement Rewards for College Scientists. We provide funding to top graduate students at the University of Minnesota who are creating new knowledge and innovative technologies to advance science in America. These are the students who represent the future hope of our country. We're gathered here tonight to honor 6 exceptional students from the University of Minnesota, our ARCS Minnesota Scholar Award recipients for 2020. We are also honoring the ARCS Minnesota Scientist of the Year, who will share her inspiring story. Tonight, we are very grateful to our event sponsors, 3M, who has sponsored 2 Scholar Awards, and Frederickson and Byron. Thank you very much for your support. There are a few housekeeping details that we need to mention before we get going. First, we will give the Scholar Awards, and then we will hear from the Scientist of the Year. There will be time for Q&A after the presentation. All of your microphones are muted and will stay muted throughout the course of this webinar. Instead of asking questions directly, please post your questions in the questions section of the webinar control panel at any time. And you might want to take a moment to identify where that panel is on your webinar control panel. It says questions, and you push the little triangle that points to the right next to it, and it'll drop down and you can see the question panel. Next slide, please. Before we start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about ARCS Foundation. ARCS is a national organization that supports 15 local chapters in different states around the country. ARCS has a long and storied history. In fact, ARCS Foundation recently celebrated its 60th anniversary. And it all began with the Sputnik Challenge. Sputnik's launch prompted a pioneering group of women leaders to help the U.S. build the scientific expertise to compete in the space race with Russia. These women founded ARCS Foundation in 1958 to provide monetary support to the best high potential science and engineering students, the one who create the most innovative technologies to advance scientific research in the U.S. Next slide, please. The influx of new scientists created tremendous progress in aerospace technologies. The result was the moon landing in a short 10 years. Amazing. Next slide, please. Today's ARCS influence is felt throughout the United States and the world through the accomplishments of ARCS scholars that we have supported over the years. This year, we're pleased to welcome into the ARCS Hall of Fame ARCS Scholar alum, astronaut Jessica Meir. You may remember that she participated in the first all-woman spacewalk exactly 1 year ago today. I read that today. We were thrilled when she acknowledged that her ARCS Hall of Fame induction from the International Space Station. And I think you would agree that Jessica has captured the imagination of young people and is a great role model and advocate for science. Next slide, please. ARCS Foundation has a national impact. In its 60 years, it's raised and given out more than $110 million to over 10,000 graduate and undergraduate students in STEM fields. The 15 chapters across the U.S. sponsor talented, motivated American students at 51 top research universities. And 100% of all contributions to the ARCS Scholar Award Fund goes directly to the students. Next slide, please. The Minnesota chapter is one of the ARCS' newest chapters. Although ARCS is a national organization, each chapter is organized as its own nonprofit. In our 10 years, over $250,000 has been awarded to 24 graduate students at the University of Minnesota. And our scholars receive $5,000 a year for 2 years, and the funding is unrestricted. Next slide, please. The students we're recognizing today have been nominated by their departments because they're exceptional individuals both in and out of the lab. And we'll hear their stories shortly. Judy Benham, who's co-president of the Minnesota chapter with me and VP of University Relations, will be presenting their awards. Judy?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ARCS 2020 Scholar Award Recognition Celebration. It's our pleasure this year to have 6 scholars from 6 different departments. We have 2 that are new scholars, which means that it's the first of their 2-year award period. Those 2 scholars are Joseph Emerson and Courtney Hutton Prospick. We also have 4 continuing scholars that we've had the benefit of interacting with over the past year. They are entering the 2nd year of their Scholar Award from the other 4 departments, and those scholars are Dean Maxam, Rachel Tenney, Z. Cheng, and Matt Lawler. We have a video where they will tell you a little bit about each other, so about themselves. Thank you.
Our first award this evening is the 3M Gives Scholar Award, and we would like to thank 3M for the donation of 2 Scholar Awards this year. We are pleased to present this award to Joseph Emerson, who is a 2nd-year graduate student in the Department of Neuroscience. Neuroscience is a newly approved department for the ARCS Foundation this year. Joe is from Shelby, Ohio, and he completed his undergraduate studies with a Bachelor of Arts in Physics and Computational Neuroscience from Ohio Wesleyan University. Congratulations, Joe.
Hi, my name is Joe Emerson. I'm a 2nd-year graduate student in the graduate program in neuroscience at the University of Minnesota. I work in Dr. Cheryl Ullman's lab using a combination of computational models and neuroimaging to explain how neural activity in the brain gives rise to visual perception. We hope that this research will lead to new understandings in the field of visual neuroscience, with applications to treatments of psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia. I was inspired to pursue research in neuroscience during my first undergraduate research experience. During this time, I worked on building a computational model that would aid in developing new treatments for epilepsy. I was immediately struck by the potential to apply mathematical tools to learn about the brain. Outside of research, my favorite pastime is playing music. Before graduate school, I played as a drummer in a cover band. Now I enjoy playing drums and guitar. I want to thank the ARCS Foundation and its donors for giving me this opportunity, and I look forward to cultivating a meaningful relationship with the ARCS Foundation going forward.
Our 2nd New Scholar Award is the 3M Gives Scholar Award, which we're pleased to present to Courtney Hutton Prospick. Courtney is a 5th-year graduate student and PhD candidate in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. Courtney is from Brush Prairie, Washington, which is a small town about 30 miles northeast of Portland, Oregon. Courtney did her undergraduate studies at Wellesley College in Massachusetts and Occidental College in Los Angeles, California, where she received her BA in mathematics. Courtney began her graduate studies at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles in computer science and engineering, and after 2 years moved with her professor to the University of Minnesota. Congratulations, Courtney, on your many accomplishments.
Hello, my name is Courtney Hutton Prospick. I'm a 5th-year PhD student in the College of Science and Engineering. My research focuses on user interaction in the realm of augmented and virtual reality. My field draws on work from a broad range of topics, including psychology, physiology, and mathematics. This integration is what first drew me to this research area. Some of my current work focuses on developing simple, intuitive interfaces that novice users can use to pilot drones through complex and confined spaces. There are broad applications for this type of work. Drones can be used to map historical sites and artifacts, They can be deployed for confined space inspections on industrial sites. They can also be flown as part of search and rescue missions in disaster areas. Outside of my work, my husband and I enjoy learning to cook cuisines from around the world and hiking with our deaf dog. I would like to thank the ARCS Foundation and its donors for this generous award and the opportunities that it will allow me to take.
We will now move on to the second year awards to our continuing ARCS scholars. I'm pleased to present the Minnesota Chapter Scholar Award to Dean Maxam. Dean is a fifth-year graduate student and PhD candidate in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. Dean is a Minnesota native from St. Paul, Minnesota. He completed his undergraduate and master's education at the University of Minnesota in a combined BS-MS program, receiving his BS in Mechanical Engineering in 2016 and his master's in 2017. Congratulations, Dean, on your continued successes.
Hi there, my name is Dean Maxam, and I am a PhD student in the Mechanical Engineering Department at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. My research topic is the design of algorithms for time-dependent problems in continuum mechanics. This is part of a broader discipline known as computational mechanics. It's important as it allows for computer simulations where traditional mathematical techniques would be intractable and experiments would be cost-prohibitive. It has many wide-ranging applications in science and engineering, from commercial product design to infrastructure. While I can't pinpoint one particular light bulb moment that inspired me to pursue this field of research, there are many smaller incidents that prompted my interest. Growing up in St. Paul, I had ample opportunity to experience Minnesota's famous winters. For me, winter was a season for curiosity. For example, have you ever wondered why it is the best temperature to grow an icicle on the side of your house? Or why does snow sometimes fall off the roof in big sheets, rather than its component flakes? The answers I received to these sorts of questions were usually incomplete and unsatisfying. This feeling persisted even during my undergraduate education, where there was never enough time to go into quite enough depth. But during my first semester as a graduate student, I took a course on continuum mechanics that exposed all the richness and nuance I had been craving. I discovered that there was a whole world of mathematical understanding of the matter and structure all around us, and that it was still an area of exciting research today thanks to the advent of modern computers. A fun fact about me is that I have a twin brother with whom I lived for 21 years, until we both went our separate ways for graduate study. He's currently doing well in Austin, Texas right now. I would like to thank the ARCS Foundation and the donors to the Minnesota Chapter Award. It's given me a lot of freedom to pursue independent research topics, and has made a tremendous difference in my graduate education. Thanks so much, and goodbye.
Our second continuing scholar award is the Minnesota Chapter Scholar Award presented to Rachel Tenney. Rachel is a third-year graduate student in the Department of Civil, Environmental, and Geoengineering. Rachel's hometown is Albany, New York, and she did her undergraduate studies at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. Her undergraduate degree was a Bachelor of Science in Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering. Congratulations, Rachel, on your continued success.
Hi, my name is Rachel Tenney, and I'm a graduate student in the Civil, Environmental, and Geoengineering Department. My research focuses on exploring the fundamental mechanisms of nitrogen cycling in rural wastewater treatment ponds, with the goal of developing sustainable, practical methods for nutrient management in rural, low-infrastructure areas. As an undergraduate student, I became fascinated by water management practices when I took a series of courses relating to sustainability. When excess nutrients are released to the environment, this contributes to biodiversity loss and aquatic dead zones where plant and animal life cannot thrive. Wastewater is high in environmentally detrimental forms of nitrogen, so it's essential to effectively and efficiently remove nitrogen species during wastewater treatment. Outside of my research, I love spending time outside with friends and family and cuddling my cat. I'm so honored to be an ARCS scholar. I've truly enjoyed the opportunity to form connections and build relationships with other scholars, ARCS members, and donors across disciplines, fields, and generations. The ARCS scholarship has helped me attend geographically diverse conferences, as well as achieve a healthy balance between my work and personal time. Thank you so much for your continued support.
Our third Continuing Scholar Award is the Ron Edstrom Memorial Scholar Award that was donated by Jenny Edstrom. This award is presented to Z Chang. Z is a fourth-year graduate student and PhD candidate in the Department of Biochemistry, Molecular Biology, and Biophysics. Z is originally from Hong Kong and immigrated to the suburbs of Chicago when she was 12 years old. Z completed her Bachelor of Science degree in biology at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. Congratulations, Z, on your many experiences and accomplishments.
Hi, my name is Z Chang, and I'm a fourth-year PhD student in the Department of Biochemistry, Molecular Biology, and Biophysics. I currently work in the lab of John-Sik Yang, where I study a group of RNA-binding proteins and how they regulate gene expression in cancer. We can then apply this knowledge that we learn and hopefully in the future to use it for cancer therapeutics. A little bit about what my light bulb moment was. So this actually occurred quite early on in my freshman year in college, where I was looking for campus jobs to fulfill my work study. I luckily came across this research position in a cancer biology lab, and it was that experience that exposed me to research, working with different cancer cell lines, mouse models, and learning about the intricacies of molecular biology techniques. After that, I was inspired to pursue a scientific research and career. A little fun fact about me is that on average, I listen to about 7 hours of podcasts and audiobooks in a day. And lastly, I just want to take a moment to thank the ARCS Foundation as well as the donors for supporting me and providing me the opportunities and funding that I need to expand my professional development. Thank you.
Our final Continuing Scholar Award this evening is the Richard Pyle, MD Memorial Scholar Award. It's presented to Matthew Lawler, who is a second-year graduate student in the Department of Biomedical Engineering, is also an inaugural trainee in the T32 Cardiovascular Engineering program in BME. Matt's hometown is College Station, Texas, and he did his undergraduate work at the Georgia Institute of Technology, where he received a Bachelor of Science degree in biomedical engineering. Before coming to graduate school at the University of Minnesota, Matt worked for 2 years for a small business innovation research company called Lintech, and he worked in the areas of 3D printing and tissue engineering. Congratulations, Matt, on your interesting educational and work experiences and your progress in your graduate degree in BME.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Lawler. I am a second-year biomedical engineering PhD student. I work in Mike McAlpine's lab, and my research focus is on the use of 3D bioprinting and programmable drug capsules to convert induced pluripotent stem cells into different cardiac cell types. This is really important to develop personalized implants that can basically circumvent immune rejection. And in terms of a light bulb moment, I would say not so much for biomedical engineering, but for the field that I'm in, more particularly in biomedical engineering. When I was basically coming out of undergrad, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I was trying to find a job, figure out through that way, and then I had an interview for a company called BioBots, which is a startup. They did 3D bioprinting, and I never really heard of that before. And I, quickly got interested in it because I realized it really fit with a lot of my past experiences and just, really had a promising future. So that interview, even though I actually didn't get the job, ended up being really, I think, inspirational for me. And then, I guess fun fact is I played trumpet for about 10 years. I'd like to thank the ARCS Foundation Minnesota for their support these past year, as well as next year, and as well as the networking opportunities. So thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your experiences with us as new and continuing scholars. We're fortunate to have you and welcome you to the community here at the University of Minnesota. I'd like to pass the microphone kind of back to Barb now, and she'll talk a little bit about the impact that the ARCS Scholar Award has for our scholars.
Thank you, Judy. We really enjoyed hearing from our scholars this year. It was a different kind of format. Usually we get to see them in person, maybe see some of their posters and hear about their research, but we got to see a whole different side of them with these videos. So thank you, scholars, for putting these videos together. Next slide, please. So as we said, ARCS sponsored scholars, 10,000 students over the past 60 years. But one impact did this ARCS Scholar Award have on these students? The national organization completed a survey this past summer of ARCS Scholar alums and came up with some very interesting information that I'd like to share with you. 91% of the respondents said that their award has had significant importance on them as students. Next slide, please. And they went on to say that 94% found it very important for their moral support and encouragement. 93% found it important for prestigious recognition by others and their peers and colleagues. 85% found it more important for focusing and helping focus their time on their research. And 81% found it important for completing their degrees. So all in all, these are very remarkable statistics on the impact that the Scholar Awards have had on these various students all over the country. And it's quite gratifying to see the response. Next slide, please. But we're also wondering, what impact do the ARCS Scholar alums have on science? And this is what was self-reported by these respondents. Over 50%, almost 60% are involved with mentoring future scientists. This is a very important task as we try to expand the reach of and impact of science throughout the country. 40% are involved with discovery and innovations. About 25% communicate the importance of national scientific competitiveness in their work. And nearly 20% have founded or lead an organization that has had significant scientific or economic impact. Next slide, please. The longer I'm in ARCS, the more I realize that it really does take a village to support a scientist. So here in Minnesota, the ARCS chapter, the University of Minnesota, representatives from industry and the community at large work together to support our ARCS scholars. But it works both ways. The more we get to know our scholars and the more that they work to become ambassadors for science in the community through events like this, where they can explain their research, but they also go out into the community and work with young students and help encourage their work and interest in science. And it helps our ARCS scholars to think about how to explain advanced scientific concepts in terms that everyone can understand. Tonight is one of our major fundraising events for this year. We need to raise money for our Scholar Award Fund so that we can continue to support these exceptional students. Frankly, funding sources are drying up for many of the research activities that our universities are attempting. The ARCS awards to these students are unrestricted, unlike many funds that they receive from the universities. The Summer Scholars Survey showed that many use their awards for activities like living expenses, attending out-of-state conferences, and buying lab equipment. And as you can see by the statistics, it was very impactful on their life as a graduate student. So we hope that you're inspired by what you're hearing tonight. With a webinar like this, we miss making personal connections with everyone, but we'll let you know a little bit later what you can do to support us and help advance science in the U.S. here in Minnesota. by either attending more events like this, becoming a member, or contributing to the Scholar Award Fund. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to move to the Scientist of the Year presentation, and we're very pleased to present this award this year. We have developed a certain set of criteria. We had some discussions about this, and this is based on the ARCS Hall of Fame selection criteria. And what I'd like to just review this with you. So we're looking for people who are in Minnesota who are demonstrating leadership in one or more of the following areas: scientific innovation, scientific discovery, peer recognition, leading an organization that has had significant impact on science, inspiring and or mentoring future scientists to fill the STEM pipeline, and fostering diversity and inclusion of underrepresented people and viewpoints in science. So with these criteria in mind, next slide, please. It is our great pleasure to give the Minnesota Chapter Scientist of the Year Award for 2020 to Professor Rhonda Franklin. And we are so pleased to have her with us tonight and hear about her inspiration and becoming a scientist. And Judy Benham will take over now and will present the award to her. Next slide, please. Judy, you may be muted.
It's a pleasure and honor to introduce Rhonda Franklin as the recipient of the ARCS Minnesota Scientist of the Year Award for 2020. Rhonda grew up in Houston, Texas, received her BS in electronic engineering from Texas A&M and her MS and PhD in microwave engineering from the University of Michigan. Rhonda has a unique combination of talents as a scientist, educator, innovator, and change agent. She is a professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department, where her most recent research combines high-speed antennas and circuits for communications, and more recently, biomedical applications such as cancer diagnostics. She has over 120 publications and conference presentations and has numerous awards, including the prestigious National Science Foundation Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, presented to her by President Bill Clinton, and the Sarah Evans Leadership Award for leadership in advising of students. Most recently, she was named as one of the 2 inaugural recipients of the Institute of Engineering Medicine Abbott Professorships in Innovative Education for her leadership as co-director of the IEM Inspire program to advance their mission to inspire 8th grade through junior college students toward future STEM careers in biomedicine and healthcare delivery. Please join me in welcoming Rhonda. Next slide.
Thank you very much, Judy, for a wonderful introduction. It is an honor to receive this recognition for work that means a lot to me. Next slide, please. The dream and promise of these 2 ladies laid the pathway for me to be here today. My mom's mom on the left dreamed of a college education, but never saw it come true. Instead, she used the community mail-in education system to obtain the equivalent of a middle school education by today's standard in her mid-50s. My grandfather eventually obtained his GED by the same method, but she was not deterred. Instead, she and my grandfather sent my mom and her sister to college with pennies they saved over the course of decades. And as a child, I don't remember a holiday present that wasn't related to my going to college. My dad's mom on the right side promised his dad, who died when he was a child, that he would go to college. So after high school, she put him on a bus to Grambling State University in Louisiana, where he met my mom, and the rest is history. Next slide, please. My dreams were enabled by my parents and my teachers in dance and music, math and science, and they're shown with the square blocks in the pictures. Dance taught me discipline and the importance of accuracy and overcoming physical challenges because it was painful. Music taught me the importance of practice to skill build and offered me a creative space to self-express. And math and science together addressed my intellectual curiosity to constantly question why with my mom and offered me many mental challenges to figure out the answer. These things helped shape who I am and who I was when I encountered my first experience with engineering. Next slide. I was always fascinated by space and the NASA programs, especially growing up in Houston. And the images were so beautiful, and I always wondered how they were made and how they could see out there in the darkness. I was also fascinated by the space shuttle program, and I wanted to figure out if I could contribute to that someday, even though I didn't know how. So because of my physics teacher recommending that I think about going to an engineering camp to learn more about engineering, my first exposure to engineering was actually at a National Science Foundation summer engineering camp that was hosted by the University of Houston engineering program in the summer before my senior high school. Before I went to that camp, I was pretty convinced that I was going to be either a lawyer or a doctor. Next slide. At Texas A&M, I had internships and different research opportunities between A&M and Michigan that provided me important access to the profession, as well as opportunities to build my skills and develop them. But because I didn't know anything about engineering, I really had to also rely on finding people who would be open and willing to support me along this journey. I discovered microwaves as an undergrad at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory because I was selected to be a GEM fellow to go on to graduate school. Now, I was selected to be a fellow to go to graduate school before I finished undergrad. And so I didn't really know anything about anything. But at that lab, because of different projects, I was exposed to microwaves and I fell in love with it. And then I focused my efforts to learn as much as I could when I returned to my undergrad program by taking technical electives, and then of course going to graduate school to learn more. My advisor, Linda Katehi, in the picture on the right, let me see the field and the profession through her different experiences. And she also really provided a very important supportive environment for our group, and it was populated with really great team members. In fact, I still interact with many of them today. So in reflection, I would say community within and around engineering has been an important part of my career development. As an undergrad, NASB, the National Society for Black Engineers, and the ladies in my sorority provided an important cultural and gender support system for me that was lacking in engineering. And my funding sponsor, the GEM Fellowship Program, also created an important team of support from Michigan and GEM and Lawrence Livermore, who were my parents, so to speak, when I was away from home. And then the GEM students were my siblings, so to speak, and that provided a strong community for me. So my project, which worked on terahertz technologies for nanosats, ultimately looped back around to be a project that was sponsored by NASA. Next slide. And then finally, I had secretly hoped that I'd meet an astronaut one day. But by the end of graduate school, I was really pleasantly surprised that I had met 3 personally. One advised me in graduate school, and one gave me a personal invitation to come and watch him fly his last flight into space as the captain, and that was Colonel Bolden. Next slide. So next, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how I use microwaves for communications and nanomedicine. Next slide. My research, which is shown sort of on the left, started by looking at how do we develop techniques to help circuits talk to each other if they're very close to each other. And essentially, if you think about a house, it's like, how do you get things in different rooms to communicate, and how do you keep them from interfering with each other? So the fun thing is we get to, in the process of learning how to design, and we also got to make those things. And those skills that I developed for making are the same skills that I use right now to help me support developing solutions for life science and human health applications. Next slide. So I'd like to talk to you about 2 areas of work that my team has done, and this will be pretty high level, but hopefully not too high, not too detailish. Next slide. So it turns out that, you know, I started at a time where everything was a component, a camera, a computer, a phone. And over the course of a decade, all of a sudden these things became blended to be computers and laptops and phones. And it turns out that we now are at a point where all of these things have some type of communications in them. And the technologies that we use to describe how these communications work are shown in that graph at the bottom that go from 3G to LTE, which a lot of us have heard about. But it turns out that right now, for the things we're trying to do, that's not good enough. And so we're heading toward 5G as a way to resolve some of the challenges we're having with having so many devices and people try to talk to each other. Next slide. On the left is sort of a normal system of different users that want to utilize our system, and they use our communication systems in a variety of ways. But because of the emergence of things like the Internet of Things, our current infrastructure can't support all of the creative and important things that we'd like to do. Next slide. So we're having to rethink, how do we get that done? And one of the ways that we're thinking about how to get that done is we're trying to now see, how do we leverage the infrastructure as is and then use that to create new solutions. So on the bottom, you'll see networks that are on Earth, which we call terrestrial networks. And in the very top, you'll see a satellite, which is what used to be used to give us those beautiful images that I saw as a child about space. The space in between is where we have a lot of flexibility. So now we're thinking about using mobile devices like UAVs or drones to actually connect to the communication networks that are on the ground, as well as to other things in between the ground and the satellites. And in order to do that, what it will allow us to do is to think about how we can have a dynamically moving communication network, because people are moving around and we'd like to be able to follow them more carefully. So one of the things that my group has been working on is trying to find ways to help develop solutions that can fit on really small systems. So we need things that are really lightweight. We need things that are really small in terms of size, and we need things that are a lot simpler to implement, because we don't have a lot of working space to use. And so we've been working on antennas and sensors that are miniaturized to fit in these platforms, and also that are designed to replace complicated electronic systems with simple one antenna and maybe a lens that's equivalent to the eyeglasses that I have on, that performs the function of many antennas with many sets of electronics. Next slide. And so I'm really excited because we have an opportunity now to start looking at how can we help support our colleagues in the that are doing research for the environment and in ecology. And so we currently have a couple of projects going where we're looking to develop sensors that can be used to study the health of a tree. And what we are interested in doing is taking the skills from my communication space, which is about evaluating material properties of electronics materials, and looking at how can we develop similar ways to model and understand the material properties of a tree, which can then be connected to the biological health of that tree, which I know nothing about, but my colleagues in ecology know everything about, as they develop medicines for those trees and they can study how they work. So we're doing that, and we're also thinking about if we wanted to use more remote structures like UAVs, which are in the form of drones, can we take some of the antenna systems that we're making that are really small and use those to create better focused antenna systems for not only observing the material properties from a distance, and which is non-invasive, but also using that to communicate with some of the systems I showed you in the previous slide. So with that, I'd like to now transition, next slide, to talking about what we're doing in the space of nanomedicine, which piggybacks very much off of the things that we've learned about how to characterize materials associated with electronic circuits and hardware. Next slide. So one of my dreams was always to figure out, after doing years of working on how to make a machine better that can talk to another machine, was how can I use these skills to help people more directly? And so this project has been really amazing. This is a collaborative project with a colleague in my department, Professor Stadler, and a colleague in oncology, Professor Modiano, where we're looking at cancer and trying to figure out if we can help understand how cancer behaves and how it moves in a biological system. And my colleague, my department, makes nanowires that can be absorbed into cells, and my team develops spectroscopy or diagnostic equipment to identify those nanowires based on their magnetic properties. So if you look on the left, that picture on the left with the blue and all the different colors, those are groups of cells with a bunch of other things. And so the blue is the nucleus, which is shown on the right of an animal cell. That's the nucleus of the cell. And then those green speckles that you see there are actually nanowires. And our dream scenario someday, we're not there yet, is to be able to put a piece of diagnostic equipment around a dish of cells and then measure how many wires are there and use that information to try to understand how many wires and what associated diseases may be determined because of the information that those wires will convey by association. Next slide. And by association, what I mean is that inside the cell, there are all kinds of things, which you saw in the previous cell, but my colleague in oncology studies something called exosomes. And exosomes are sort of like the garbage bags of a cell. The cells spit them out, and when they spit them out, if researchers study the trash, they can figure out a little bit about what's going on inside of the cell when it gets sick. It turns out that those trash bags actually also tend to house these nanowires. And so our goal would be to be able to evaluate those if we could, to give some indications of what's going on. Next slide. So in essence, what we're doing is we're looking at making the equivalent of the library system in books, where you have labels that are in the books, and then you can store them, and when you need them, you take them out and you scan and you can leave. So for us, the books equivalent is cells. The barcodes that are in the books would be the nano labels, and the scanners would be the diagnostic equipment that my students are developing. And the idea would be that if we can measure these things and measure different materials types, then we can simultaneously give you a lot of information about what might be going on in a sick cell. Next slide. So microwaves, and turns out microwaves has been extremely important and helpful to me for outreach. Next slide. My first experience with the microwaves and the power of a microwave was when I caught our microwave on fire when I was a child. And of course, beside being shocked that I've just caught the thing on fire and what to do with that, I was always wondering what went wrong. Other than knowing that a piece of wire was in there, which they told us not to do, I had no idea why that happened. Of course, now I know exactly why that happened since I study microwaves. Next slide. So I've used my research to really give me a platform to talk to young people about STEM, especially because I didn't learn about the engineering part of STEM until much later in my career. So we've done a broad range of things, especially in the beginning, that are really where the motto at that time in my career was really about how do I engage students, and then how do I learn from them so that I can figure out how to teach them better. So, one of my most popular activities was the electric pickle. Preschoolers love to see a pickle turn into light bulbs. And we've participated in things at the Science Museum, some of their programs like African Americans in Science, where we get to show people how, how microwaves work, a little bit about circuits. One of the things that I found to be really fun have been some of the College of Science and Engineering STEM camps for girls. And so the picture in the middle shows the kits that we would take to the girls, and we talk about communications, and then we'd let them build these circuits. But I was always tickled at the kind of comments that they would make on the right and the stickies that you see, where they talk about, failure and succeeding, or that they had fun, and that made me very happy. The other thing is that our lab has also hosted tours by different people. The top picture, where I'm holding this white object, is actually an antenna, similar to the things I talked about previously. But those black spiky things in the background are actually cones. And I've invited kids to come into the chamber, close the door, and scream as loud as they like. And the sound is absolutely absorbed. And we talk about, what does that mean? We also have taken antennas and let students look at a picture of what antenna signals look like, and then they block the signals and they make them go away and they make them come back, and they like that. And it's exciting to observe how they observe that and experience that information. Next slide. So when it comes to my college approach, I really thought a lot about this at the beginning of my career. The National Academy of Sciences had a report that basically talked about the engineer of 2020, and this would have been late 1990s, like 98, 99. And so I tried to develop a lot of programs in the classroom and in our outreach, particularly for this age group, that really focused on the things that they recommended: teaming, communications, peer learning, team projects, things that they believe were important. And so here we are, 2020. So I think at this point I've sort of organically embedded that. Someone reminded me of that before, that we've been doing teaming. But the other thing that kind of came as along the way about 8 years ago was that I started working with, by invitation, one of my colleagues from that picture of the students from Michigan, and another colleague who is also in there. And the three of us co-founded this program called Project Connect. And it's been really fun to try to bring students to our conference, the Microwave Engineering Conference, that would normally never show up there. Typically, only graduate students attend these things. But we've been bringing these students in person. And so the picture in the middle you see is a group of students. One of them actually is from the University of Minnesota, Duluth. And then this year we had to do it virtually. So the map kind of shows you where everybody was at the time of the conference and how we all piped in like we're doing right now. And we had a wonderful, wonderful experience. Next slide. So the new thing for me, at least moving forward, is this idea that's been, the new thing has been promoted by the National Academy of Science and Engineering, has really been about convergence. The kind of problems we're trying to solve today are really difficult. And so they require lots of people from different areas to come together that don't normally play together. And that's called convergent research. And then how do we figure out how we can play together in a meaningful way, so that we can actually solve some of the healthcare problems of today, some of the environmental problems of the day, some of the communications problems of the day. So I'm excited about that. This is totally new, and I get to be a little bit like a kid where I have a lot to learn, and I love learning. So this is going to be awesome. Next slide. So one place that I'll have an opportunity to try these out is in this area called in the Institute of Engineering and Medicine. We're developing an Inspire program that has these 4 areas, and 3 of them are related to preparing students, developing them, and community engagement. And then we also have a piece that is about supporting educators that support the students. And one of our signature events is the 2020, the Inspire Conference. This is our 3rd year. And the theme will be focusing on rapid response that the university had to COVID-19. So we have about 3 projects and innovators that'll talk about what they did, how they did, why they did. Next slide. So microwaves have been a vehicle to do good in the world for me by addressing my head needs for intellectual stimulation and my heart needs to help others in the world, and how to balance, and constantly struggling to balance that. Next slide. So I'd like to end by just saying thank you to the ARCS Foundation for supporting STEM education, and for this wonderful opportunity to share some some things about the areas of research that I've been working on. That's been important and fun for me. Thank you. And this is my daughter, by the way, with Goldie.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for a really exciting presentation of the work that you're doing and the work that you're contemplating for the future, with flashbacks to how you got there. In this portion of the meeting, we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Franklin. Our intention had been to also include Anya Belinsky, who's a professor in biomolecular areas at the U of M, but there were technical difficulties. So I'm going to present some of Anya's questions as well as my own to provoke a conversation in kind of an interview format with Dr. Franklin. So one of the questions would be, how can we support people who are currently pursuing an education in STEM areas in general and in engineering specifically?
So one of the things that when I think back about what has been really helpful to me is I discovered the word encouragement. And I don't think I appreciated how important that is, but I think that people who are pursuing this pathway, because it tends to be difficult and you experience a lot of failure, I think one of the things that we have to do is really focus on what types of information are we giving to them. And I think encouragement is one of the elements of what that information should be. That is more important probably than telling them how to do it and what to do. But I found that the people who have been really inspirational in my life have somehow managed to make me feel like I can do it. And I would say that it's because they framed their response in the voice of encouragement.
Thank you. You've talked about all of the rapid changes in technology and what's happened in the last 20 years, and you're in cutting edge work, both from the engineering and electrical science side as well as the medicine side. Are there some areas that you think are really ripe for explosion of new knowledge that are very exciting? What will be important in the next 10 years?
I think nanotechnology is really prime for opening up a plethora of spaces that we're not typically involved in. For example, I'm part of this new ERC, ATP Bio, Advanced Technologies for Preservation of Biological Systems. And it is using, they're developing solutions to preserve cells and tissues and organs and some simple living systems, but they're relying on nanostructures to help them heat things using RF frequencies, for example. That's just one example. And so what happens is you start to observe that nanotechnology has matured enough that we can now start thinking about how to apply it. And I think, that's a really exciting space, because I'm sure there are going to be many other things that we think of that will be thought about that we can't imagine that we'll be able to do in the future.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Can you share some examples in the Inspire program in the first 2 years of how students have reacted to different aspects of the Inspire program? You talked about the acoustical chamber, which I thought was really cool. But just in the dynamics of interacting with the students, tell us a little bit about how that works.
So with Inspire, it actually has been motivated by the fact that we had this conference specifically guided toward high school students. And what's happening now is, 2 years later, we are now at a point where we realize that there's a need to create community for those students. And we have a broad host of partners, and future partners on campus that want to work together to figure out how we can not only provide students with training opportunities, but also supplement those training opportunities with experiences that allow them to form community and allow them to have safe spaces and supportive voices to listen to them and serve as mentors. So in a way, we're currently at the point where we have a blueprint, and in this coming year, our goal will be to develop that blueprint into a physical thing where we'll have cohorts of students that are participating in these activities more in real time. So right now, we're at a point where we've architected what to do, we've identified where we want to do it, and we're building that capacity. So at the moment, the students cohorts are part of our future vision for Inspire. But we do have constant contact right now with high schools programs that have participated and receive a lot of favorable feedback from the teachers who support those students, that they're getting some tangible examples of what they can do if they pursue STEM for medical applications.
Thank you very much. When you talk about the challenges going forward and the aha moments that you had coming into it, how did you decide to go the academic route instead of other avenues that are open to engineers?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I'm not sure that was an aha moment. I actually had a plan to go to industry. I guess the aha was that as much as I thought that my development was about to my technical skills, the aha moment was when I realized that we are all victims of the economy. And so whether you want to or not, think about it that way. It took me 12 years to get a PhD. When you think about from beginning to end, the economy was never on my mind. The only economy I considered was how was I going to pay for school. But what really made me decide to do academia at the point that I did is because at that time I was a pretty strong candidate for an industrial position or an academic position, and I really wanted to go to industry for 3 to 5 years and come back to the university. But the economy was horrible, and the companies that I thought I would like to work with were going through massive restructuring. So I really just decided that if I was going to do academia, it was either now or probably never, because I wasn't sure I would look the way I needed to look on paper to be an attractive candidate by the time all of that, restructuring took place, and in the context of a difficult economy.
Thank you. What advice are you giving your daughter at this point?
Oh, what advice am I giving what advice would I give my daughter at this point? I guess what I would say is, I think what I've learned is that everyone is a teacher. Even if some people are better teachers than others, and that if you approach an experience with someone as an opportunity to learn what you can learn from them, then that will make it a little bit more palatable when you meet people who don't necessarily give you what you want. But if you are willing to accept what they can give you, you'll find out that the sum of all of these different experiences actually can be quite helpful. The second thing I would tell my daughter is that, success is the destination, but failure is a necessary part of that journey. And I really think that what we have is not, I don't think you should strive for success. I think you should strive for successful moments, because at least in my experience, my successes are like, instantaneous spikes, and then it's back to reality again. So I think it's important to just realize that failure is okay. And then I think the third thing I would just say is that, believe in yourself is just as important as having belief in yourself is just as important as having other people believe in you. And so that's the piece that I think is critical. And in my worst moments, when I have fallen, which has been many times, I think it's important to remind yourself to always look up and forward. It's okay to reflect, to learn a lesson or two, but then get up and you'll have more opportunities to learn more lessons. So just look up and look forward as much as you can.
Thank you. You talked about convergence, which brings requires the integration of all of the different disciplines. In your world, how do you go about facilitating that? And do you have a specific example?
So what I'm finding, if you work in the world of research, is that we're not supported to do anything unless we don't know the answer. So with convergent research, I would say that we don't know the answer. And so one of the things is that we know we must do this and that we'll have to figure it out, and that'll be the exciting part of it. There are some hints of what to do by looking at other disciplines that have or other problem areas that have worked on convergent problems, like in clinical healthcare. They have done a lot of convergent work, a lot of transdisciplinary work, and we will use those as examples to help guide our effort. But for example, with the center we have, which is one of NSF's first generations of centers working on a problem that requires convergent research, a lot of this is going to be figuring it out as we go, but using our past experiences to inform and enable us as a starting point.
Thank you so much. I think that at this point, we really would like to shift to questions from the audience. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Ingrid Blair, who is our VP of Development in the Minnesota ARCS chapter. And Ingrid has been collecting the questions that people submit online, and I'll hand the baton, so to speak, to her for her to relay some of those questions to you.
Thanks, Judy. Dr. Franklin, we'll just go through two questions from the many questions we got online. The first one says, congratulations, Professor Franklin. The application of a lens to multiply the effects of a single antenna sounds fascinating. Could you expand on how that works?
Oh, sure. So it turns out that if you think about what your eyeglasses do, of course, light comes in your eyeglasses, but imagine if your eyes were a source pushing out. What the lens can do is you can design a lens so that it can take light from or signals from one side and focus them in a very specific way to a location. And so what we've been trying to do is to figure out, can we design these lenses so that we can be very, very specific in where the beams of the source signal, the antenna, is pointed. But also we have discovered that in the near field, there are these really interesting properties where we can make images that have a certain shape that we can then use to drive other electronics that are located in close proximity to that structure.
Okay, thank you so much. We're just getting some more questions in, so I'm sorting them through, but I'll go through the one final one here. So the next one says, congratulations again, Dr. Franklin, and thanks for sharing your story. Are there online resources that my kids could use to access part of the Inspire program that you talked about?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if you Google IEM Inspire program, it'll take you to the website at the in the Institute for Engineering and Medicine, and that will point you to some of the things that we have going on right now. So there, in fact, one thing that I didn't say in the slides, but this year we've created mini schools that will allow you to take some little short, it's a short course, so to speak, of things related to medicine. Our theme is COVID, so if you want to know how did people in the medical profession approach solving problems for COVID, you can do that path. Or you can see how did engineers contribute to solving problems related to COVID. And the mini schools are really going to be fun because we've got the experts that have been doing that work, but they are presenting little short videos with a little question. And if you do about 80% of them, if you complete those, you'll get a certificate from us.
Oh, excellent. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for not only your wonderful presentation, but answering all these questions. We very much appreciate it and congratulate you again on being our ARCS Scientist of the Year in 2020.
Thank you very much.
We can go to the next slide. I just want to close out tonight's session by saying thank you again for the people who have generously donated to ARCS in the past. In particular, we'd also like to thank our corporate sponsors, both 3M, who has sponsored 2 Scholar Awards this year, and we're just delighted to have that, and Frederickson and Byron. We really appreciate these corporate sponsors. It really gives an additional boost to the program. And you may have noticed in there, we also have 3 individuals who also independently sponsor 1 scholar. You can go to the next slide. So we thank you all in the audience there for your presence tonight and encourage your continued support of science. We also hope that we've piqued your interest in ARCS Minnesota and the many ways that we in particular support science advancement. You will be receiving an email with instructions on how to kind of address any of those bullet points on how you can help us. Next slide. And finally, before you go, if you can, there's going to be a post-webinar survey that will come right up. And so if you could fill that out, it would really help us. And finally, there will be a video recording attached to the webinar. There will be a link to the video recording in the email of this webinar, in the email that we send out. So again, thanks so much for supporting science and being here this evening. Take care. Bye.